Before covering today's series, I wanted to quickly warn those who haven't seen the show that I will be going into some spoilers, so please, before I ruin it for you, come back another time once you watched it. And now, let's talk about today's topic, Monster, the Ed Gein story. After finishing Monster, I was quite shocked at the reactions it received. Some called it an American Horror Story wannabe, while others dismissed it entirely just after an episode or two, questioning its authenticity. But what caught my attention wasn't just the criticism itself, it was how quickly people jumped to conclusions. Don't get me wrong, after doing a bit of research myself, I too noticed some creative liberties in the narrative. However, the series establishes one of its crucial elements from the start: its perspective. The story isn't told through cold factual precision like a documentary. We don't get neatly packed facts handed to us with dates and confessions. Most of it's told through the eyes of Ed himself, whose mind becomes so shattered that the concept of reality is no different to him than his own imagination. And we, as the audience, are made to feel how unstable truth becomes when filtered through the mind like his. An example of this we see quite early on in the series is how Henry's death is presented. There is no scream or shock. It's quiet, uncertain even. We don't know what actually happened, and neither does Ed. Yet the lack of clarity never makes the events inaccurate. It just makes them honest to his mind. Only when we see Henry's dead body laying on the floor again later on, we get to understand we're trapped, second-guessing what's reality and what's fiction, much like our protagonist after the death of his mother. And that's the brilliance of Monster. It shows us horror through confusion and the slow creeping terror of losing your grip on reality itself. The focal point being the battle between Ed and the monster that is born out of his trauma and inability to be himself. I believe the expectation of the story to be more grounded and to focus more on Gein's acts rather than his decaying mind is what got some people confused. The depth at which the story navigates and the heavy use of metaphors along with its subplots can be a bit much to take in at first. When there is a shift in focus, the stories can give the impression that they will overstay their welcome, but they rarely do. Except for two: Elsa's and Christine's. Even though their involvement in the narrative does directly affect Ed's character, therefore can't be considered filler, their stories were the only ones that made the series drag for me. In Alfred's and Tobe's case, on the other hand, both subplots gave us a larger perspective with a more engaging arc and a runtime that worked better with the main narrative. With them, it felt like they knew exactly just how much breathing time was necessary before throwing us back into Gein's complex and grotesque mind. The series doesn't hold back when it comes to brutality neither, nor does it rush to the next shocking image or cheap thrill. Instead, it lingers on the silence, the isolation, the suffocation, and the aftermath of the horrifying actions of a man who couldn't let go the only person that mattered to him most: his mother, who, no matter what he did, never saw him for who he was, yet her control on his mind was so strong that not even death could silence her voice. The voice that not only judged but also condemned. Beneath the monstrous acts, however, there's something deeply human, and although Ed's story is an exaggeration of this, we get to see the devastating effects of being unloved and abandoned by the person that defines our world, sending us with him into the abyss of insanity. Why are we humanizing this monster? Sounds the question. In order to find the answer, we need to take a look at the structure of the series. From the beginning of the show until the last 2 episodes, all we get to see is how Ed commits or how he fantasizes about committing the most disgusting crimes known to man, and how these crimes affected the people whose loved ones were involved and the community they lived in. We see the influence on Hollywood and the creation of 2 of the most disturbing movies of their time, not to mention all the serial killers that idolized him. Unlike many of the statements I read online, however, the show never asks us to feel sorry for Ed. It simply lets us see him as a human being, who, under the right circumstances and some guidance, could have lived an ordinary life, get married, have children of his own. Had he not been controlled and manipulated by his mother, get used by Adeline, who only encouraged the killer in him even more, together with his loneliness, negligence, and emotional suppression, he slowly and unknowingly turned into the Butcher of Plainfield, the very monster that, in the end, he himself realized he never wanted to be. After being the resident of 2 mental institutes for 26 years in total, he got a taste of what a normal life could have been like. He started to have friends, and even helped out by doing smaller chores, meanwhile receiving the help he always needed. Then came the true turning point: Adeline's visit. Ed's surprise at how much progress he made from being his old self compared to Adeline, who was still so selfishly stuck in the same mental state he last seen her in, was the ultimate affirmation that he recovered as much as he could from the monster that made him famous. But old habits die hard, and some wounds never fully heal. Despite his best efforts, the monster that grew into a myth overshadowed him still. Finally, death came for him, and Mother was waiting. For the first time, she seemed proud, and even though it was all for the wrong reasons, Ed seemed to have found peace. Because in his mind, the loss of his sanity, dignity, and the creation of a twisted legacy of horror were worth it after all. It was the cost for an afterlife he never got to live. Ed Gein's story is certainly not what people might have expected, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The amazing acting, the use of metaphors, and seeing Ed struggle with the monster within really made it an interesting watch for me. Even with its occasional less interesting subplots and uneven pacing, Monster doesn't romanticize or glorifies its protagonist's violent history. It simply explores how fragile truth is when the human mind turns on itself, and showcases the effects of what the mix of manipulation, isolation, and unanswered pain can do to an individual, reminding us that monsters aren't always born, they are made.